important. So one of our, we call them wilders, kids who've been through our Play in the Wild programs. And one of our wilders out in California recently put together a team to support undocumented Americans to evacuate during the fires that were happening out there just recently. And so I bring that to say that I'm about to talk about this program, and the most important thing is the ripple effect, how these students then turn into these citizens that are living compassion, they're living nonviolence, and they're implementing that. And the shake in my voice is because the story I wanted to start with actually is about a couple of kids that were, well, they're not kids anymore because they're in their 20s, but in our 2011 program, we had 3 new Americans as really what we call refugees who immigrate here to the United States. And they were actually from Charlottesville, Virginia, which of course that name and that city brings up the most recent events that took place there months ago of when the white supremacy took to marching, and then there was the counter protests. And these 3 students had come in our program in 2011. And during that program, an interesting conversation ensued. So what we do at Play in the Wild is we bring together students of different cultures and different backgrounds. And we set a space of compassion and empathy so that they can then have the conversations they need to have. And this one particular evening, we were also learning to make pizza from scratch. And a student from Australia was really complaining because this making of pizza was at the end of our fast. And we had been doing a practice of fasting, which is a spiritual practice that a lot of nonviolent activists do train in to build their own personal stamina and their own personal spiritual basis. So we had been fasting all day and in meditation. And then we were ending the day with making homemade pizzas. And this Australian student was really complaining about how hungry he was. And then when he went to make his pizza, he had actually taken a fair amount of the toppings and didn't leave a lot of toppings for other people. And so it opened up a conversation of, well, we're all hungry. And he was really complaining about how hungry he was. But then the student that had immigrated from the Congo and had come over with his family began to speak about what hunger was like in the refugee camp back in the Congo. And the conversation that then unfolded isn't something that we can script or plan. It was simply born out of the fact that we built a qualitative connection with these students so that they could then reveal to each other their stories, and they were able to gain understanding. And by the end of that conversation, the student from Australia said, wow, I now realize I don't think I've actually ever known hunger. And so just beginning to build bridges like that, that's one of the things we do at Play in the Wild. And when we brought Play in the Wild here to Vermont and we began doing programs here, we contacted the Vermont Refugee Resettlement program, and they started to connect us to youth and to kids through their program. And even though we have these great kids programs and teen programs, we decided we wanted something a bit more. And that was where our Crossroads, Where Cultures Meet program was born. So what we do now is we actually interview, we do orientations, and we find adults that want to be mentors, and then we train them. And it's unique because, as I've learned, most mentoring programs spend anywhere from 2 to 4 hours training their mentors. And we request a full 2 days of training, plus ongoing training, so that our mentors are working with understanding power and privilege. They're working with understanding cultural intelligence. They're working with understanding race-related issues, so that they can actually really be advocates, not just for the teen that they're mentoring, but becoming advocate for the whole family. Because when a family comes here to the United States and they've come from countries such as the Congo, Syria, Iraq, Burma, Somalia, Nepal, oftentimes the parents themselves they're on a pretty steep learning curve for English. So when their students enter our school system, the parents don't quite know how to navigate our school system and be the advocates that their students might need. So this is a place where our mentors really step in to support these students. So before I go in any further, I want to invite Ashraf, who's on the call too, to come in and share a little bit about the Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program and a bit about our partnership.
Thank you, Catherine. My name is Ashraf Alamaturi, and I'm originally from Syria, and I work at Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program as the English Language Learning Coordinator. Also, a member of the Board of Trustees of Baba Tree, the mother organization for Crossroads. So as a person coming from a country really torn by war, and also by as a person whose English is a second language, I found myself really enjoying working with refugees from around the world, trying to empower them and giving them a voice with the other teachers. As Catherine said, that when refugees come to United States, usually there are some challenges in addition to any other people coming here. The first challenge is learning English, and the second challenge, finding a job. And usually finding a job is really very correlated with how much English do you have. So when I came in 2013, my main goal actually is to provide a quality English instructions for refugees and asylees in Vermont. So I started with really making sure the program is really a quality program, because usually it was like anything is okay for when a person is a refugee or asylee. So it doesn't need to have a quality. So I try to change that. We try to make sure that the learning process is happening. There's an outcomes of the learning, and students can learn, use their English really to benefit them. So speaking of that, we started really implementing different programs. Some of these programs were actually targeted general English learning. And other programs called English for Specific Purposes, where we try to work with employer who hired refugees and or immigrants in general, to ensure that those employees have their opportunity in climbing the ladder, the job ladder, and have a fair also kind of paycheck. Because most of the times when an employee will come to us saying that I love employers come to us say I love my employees and they are ready for a raise, but because of their English I cannot do that. So this is where we come to provide this kind of program to make sure that the clients or our students are really not disadvantaged because of their English.
And this is something too, thank you, Ashraf, for bringing that, because this is something where Crossroads is training mentors to really be advocates for students at their high school and their junior highs, because not only do our students who are coming from these war-torn countries have, you know, they have the emotional impact, but then they get here to the United States and there's already the impact of how race relations are set up here in the United States, and then the prejudice against not being able to speak English. And one of our local high schools, we've been really challenged, and I worked really closely with a mentor to support a student just this year. And I spent the first 3 days of the start of the high school at the high school speaking to counselors and making sure our students actually had classes. So some of the prejudice that was happening was because they don't know English, they're not tested correctly for what they do know. So they're put in classes that are actually below their level of math or science. And then they're not even really asked what would they like to learn. So in this one particular student's case, when I basically demanded a meeting with the counselor the second day of school, and we were looking at this student's schedule where he's technically a sophomore in high school, and he had 3 empty spaces on his schedule and 2 study halls. So that meant he was only enrolled in 3 classes. And so we advocated for him. And then at one point during the discussion, the student looked at me and he said, I'd like to keep up my French. And then the counselor said, oh, do you know French? And I kind of laughed and I said, yes, he knows French really well. In fact, he translated for us at one of our camps this summer, and he'd like to keep up his French. And so then finally he got placed in a French class. So one of the things our students face is an immediate prejudice because of not having any English. So they get placed in classes below their level. And I've heard that complaint again and again from new American youth that are coming in. And so that's something that Crossroads is working with the schools and with each of the students and their families to make sure, because these kids have dreams and aspirations. You know, they want to do different things. You know, some want to become artists, some want to become doctors. They already have dreams and visions that started as children in their country of origin. And then by the time they get here in junior high or high school, you know, they're ready for education, and they want that course of action and deserve to get the classes that they need. And so one of the trainings we give, particularly to the mentors, is training in nonviolent communication, so that they can actually bridge and begin to develop a bridge of communication with the counselors or school administrators or even teachers, so that we can all get on the same page to support these youth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Catherine. So, speaking of that, also, uh, it was also we try to make sure that all that
Ashraf, we're not able to hear you. Just real quick for the participants on the call, Ashraf actually had an issue, so he's driving in to his office, and so he's trying to participate by his speakerphone. So I don't know if Catherine, maybe you can just kind of.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So also we even with providing English. So I'll share a story from one of my students. We have a program called Pathway to Higher Education, where we trying to prepare students who could not complete their college studies in their home countries because of war or different reasons. So one of these workshops was for parents. So at the end of the workshop, one of the parents standing and actually tears in his eyes, and he said that, so thank you very much for what you are doing and helping us to know. We used to be a refugee in a camp, and we have been treated as really second-class people, where studying, working is not for us. So by really treating again and by providing the education, he said that I regain my confidence in myself. So it's really with education, it's a very rewarding experience for me in my job, that when you see people really getting a raise in their work, or getting a scholarship, or completing their studies, that's really very rewarding experience. Also, when you try to provide justice, sometimes justice is also have a different forms. For example, we have some immigrants and refugees who's deaf, and again, they have the right to learn the language. So we try to do a kind of American Sign language with English language learning. So it was really a wonderful class, and I really attending that class. It looks like a therapy for me. Back to puppetry, if I can have this bridge between VRRP and puppetry. So when I joined puppetry, really, it's I believe in their mission to promote nonviolence and also equal opportunities for everybody. So with puppetry, I remembered when Jesse contacted me 4 years ago about asking me if there's any refugee will be interested in having a scholarship going to one of the camps. And I really appreciate that, because usually, especially for kids, when they come to the United States, it's a very big cultural change for them. And usually the first thing that we'll see is the school system. So when there's a camp, just to see the community, to see other people, it was really helpful for this kind of transition between the mother culture and the new culture, the new host, the new country, which will be their own country. So I personally believe in education, and education can really change or at least help in changing the world for better. And I found that with puppetry and VRP, my work with my clients, I don't know who really empowering the other, like, because I'm really getting, and the teachers as well, getting a lot of empowerment from the students and the clients. In addition to the gaining the diversity of thinking and cultural perspective from our clients. Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because I think that's something that makes Crossroads unique as a mentoring program here in the United States is I guess the best way I can say it is we want to be community minded. We want to think in circles, not in hierarchy. Really building a power with system. And a lot of these students come from cultures where, family and community is really important. And you can have as many as 30 and 40 people that you consider family. There isn't a sectioning off or an individualism so created as we do here, particularly in the United States or in Western cultures, where it's very individualistically based. And so we've built our mentoring program in such a way that all the mentees get to know all the mentors. And we, at our gatherings, we continue our training in nonviolence, and we do community building with each other so that we can have a broader sense. And this is it can be a lot for the Americans involved, who are used to a very different kind of lifestyle where, most of them grew up and left their home and have very little contact with their family anymore, to then now enter a very community-based program. In fact, not just get to know their mentee, although that's their primary relationship, but get to know this entire family that surrounds the mentee. And then we find this is very, very important, particularly for our students that have been pulled from this culture and maybe have arrived here to the United States without other family members or immediate family members, but they've arrived here with a group of people that they now have to form as family, but they're not necessarily with any biological family members. So those students in particular, we really want to surround them with their sense of community intact. And so we do that through our trainings of deciding that the base of our community is a culture of compassion, a culture of empathy, a culture of building bridges and strengthening relationships. And if I can just, for a quick moment, just share our mission statement. So Crossroads is dedicated to the empowerment of youth within a community in which the youth experience nurturing one-on-one mentoring relationships that offer concrete guidance, academic support, and consistent friendship, which in turn allows each youth to develop their full potential, capable of making informed, responsible decisions as involved members of the greater community, overcoming barriers of racism, sexism, and cultural prejudice. And going back to my original story of the 3 students that were from Charlottesville, Virginia, their mentor was somebody that we trained that was actually their English as a second language teacher in their school. And we trained her in our program, and she became their mentor. And I was in touch with those 3 students right after the eruption of the events in Charlottesville. And the young girl is now working in the hospital there. And she shared with me that night, when people were coming in who had been injured from what had taken place there in the protests and the anti-protests, she said to me, she texted me and she said, "Thank you. I'm remembering everything you trained me in. I'm offering empathy to everyone. And it's amazing. Everyone is equal when they come in on a gurney." And I just hit tears of just knowing that one of our students was there receiving these people from 2 sides of a conflict. And she was there with this amazing empathic heart, offering compassion to both sides, and then seeing, because she knows from war, from where she came from, she knows that once you're all on a gurney, you're just human. And it's those kinds of stories, and seeing how our students can live their dreams, but they're not just completing their academics, they're infusing their life with this empathy and this compassion, and they're becoming amazing members. Well, I guess I'll say it this way: amazing members of a society I want to be a part of, which is a society based on compassion and connection. I guess I'll pause there because I'm a little taken with some tears, but I'll pause there.
Okay, so one of the things I do want to take an opportunity is to formally introduce Ashraf. We weren't sure if he was going to make it in. I see he's made it in, and so you'll get a chance to see him. But so let me just introduce him. He only really was very modest about the things that he's doing. Ashraf Alamatori is an English language learning coordinator at Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program, and also, as he mentioned, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigration, which is acronym USCRI. He taught English at Kalamun University and conducted teacher training courses in multiple regions in Syria. Previously to joining USCRI, Mr. Alamatori was Director of Language Department at the International Center for Human Construction. Mr. Alamatori is a Fulbright alumnus and holds a master's degree in teaching English as a foreign language from Albeth University, as well as a master's degree in teaching English for speakers of other language from St. Michael's College. He holds a BA in English Literature from Damascus University, and he is currently a PhD candidate in education leadership at University of Vermont. He's also a father of 3 children, and in spare time, he plays music and likes to cook. So,
thank you.
I can vouch for what an amazing cook he is.
Great, okay. So, Ashraf, did you have anything else that you'd like to add before we get into questions?
So I think I just want to add about really we call refugees and asylees, as Catherine said, that new Americans. And I really have an opportunity to meet with them within 5 days of their arrivals to the United States. And also I have another opportunity to meet them after 5 years when they are ready to become a citizen. And I'll see how much the growth that really they gained with their English. Most of them having stable and good jobs after 4 or 5 years, and also most of them are homeowners, which is really amazed me, remembering 5 days from the arrival, new to the country, barely speaking any English, and after really 5 years is we consider it in teaching English is not that long time. Speaking English, having a job, and building their life in the United States, volunteering with different organizations. And just yesterday, I met a client who is a seasoned student. I think he celebrated his 85th birthday last month, and I'm asking him, how's the family? He said that I'm still really enjoying my family, and I did not give up my job. I still go to the job, and I say that, wow, that's really amazing. So this is the population really. I'm happy every day to work with and learning from. Also with puppetry, just because I'd like to highlight the mission of puppetry, which is they really, every person there trying hard to make opportunities for youth in general, and also immigrants and new Americans in particular. So I feel really very lucky to be in these two organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Catherine and Ashraf, and thank you for Catherine moving stories. Now we'll get into questions here, and one of the first ones we have is directed towards Catherine, and it's from a Sabine in Germany, and she likes the presentation, and she wants to know if there's any written material about your themes that you can introduce to the members, mentors, or even some exercises to train them. She is a CT in Germany and really interested in social change. Catherine, can you speak to that?
Yeah, hi Sabine. Yes, I actually have my book, Peaceable Revolution Through Education, has been translated into German. It just hasn't come out quite yet. And I do have some other written materials that I'm happy to make accessible. And I don't know if there's a way we can do that with Charter Compassion, or you can always contact me at info@playinthewild.org. We are really happy to share materials, particularly our handouts, might inspire you in ways you can offer trainings and different things. And, you know, we do offer trainings to educators and to mentors and people who work with youth. So I'm very excited to say that some things have been already translated into German, and other things, and I can actually put you in touch with some folks I know in Berlin that have done some training directly with me as well.
And Catherine, I could, if you send it to me, I can make sure that it gets out to people who are interested on this call.
Great, perfect.
A couple of questions. These questions actually were sent in advance with anticipation of your presentation. One of the questions, I guess from a broader perspective, is how can we, and I'm assuming that as in a general sense, grow an inclusive community for the children of refugees and immigrants? What are some of the things that the larger American, I guess, community can do to make it more inclusive?
Ashraf, you want to go first, particularly
Sure, yeah.
as a parent and as an educator?
So when usually I'll do our tutor training, and one of the first question I ask the participant, why do you think it's important to teach people or to tutor people from the other countries? And usually the answer is that our grandparents came here as immigrants, and we'd like to help new Americans. So it's again, I think that if everybody really remember that he or she themselves were an immigrant, or their parents or their grandparents or somebody that they know, that's really will make it more inclusive to understand the needs for other people to come, and the richness of the cultures. The other thing that I believe is starting with the school system, starting with the family. With the family, really try to teach their kids the importance of diversity and the importance of accepting other people. And if you are right, that doesn't mean other people are wrong. So this is, people have a different ways, and then it will complement it with the school system to enforce the diversity and in the society. And then, because those kids will be the employers, those kids will be the teachers, those kids will be the engineer, the doctors for the futures. Catherine, do you like to?
Yeah. Yeah, what you got me thinking about too is, you know, thinking from an Indigenous perspective of how, you know, my ancestors were welcoming and then confused by how power and privilege became upended. And so I really invite Americans or Westerners, particularly if you can identify as white, to understand power and privilege and to really look at that. And the inclusivity in your question, Michael, I think one of the aspects is understanding that a first language is really important, as vital as learning English is, to be a part of America and be a part of what's happening here and to be able to educate in our systems. It's important that a first language remains empowered. And that's something we do at Play in the Wild. Our programs are offered in multiple languages, and we encourage the students to speak in their first languages as well as English. And so that there isn't, the power and privilege gets a bit removed from what English can be a domination thing, but then it becomes this key, this beautiful key to open doors in someone's life. So English becomes this fun thing for kids to learn, and this beautiful thing for the teens to begin to pick up. And then another piece that we've really worked with at Play in the Wild in our programs around inclusion is, again, setting up these empathic spaces for real conversations to unfold, so that there's real understanding between people. You know, and this can happen with young ones as well as the teens. You know, I've seen it in our kids program. You know, there was a student from New York, and he was really adamant in not understanding why couldn't we have weapons in our village that we were building? We were building earthen shelters down by the creek and things. And the kids had all come to an agreement that we wanted to play in such a way that we really didn't need weapons. And this one youth, or he was 7 years old, you know, and could be identified, you know, his family would identify as, you know, European descent to America and white. And, you know, he really didn't understand why we couldn't have weapons. And he began to throw, you know, what we would label as a tantrum. And interestingly enough, these two young boys from Syria were very curious about his tantrum and walked up to him. And this young boy from the Congo, and they came over and said, "What's wrong?" You know, they were actually curious. Like, they saw he was upset. And so then one of our animators came, and she said, "Well, he's really upset that you know, we're not having any weapons here in our village." And, you know, and so the older boy from Syria said, "You know, well, what do you need a weapon for?" And the young boy began to explain, "Well, I need to be able to protect myself. I just want to play with it. You know, I don't really mean to hurt anyone." And then the younger boy from Syria just kind of blurted out, he said, "You know, bombs are real." And he goes, he goes, "It took my home." And then the older boy goes, "Well, it didn't exactly take her home." And then they got into a little discussion about what actually happened. But then the boy from New York turned and said, "Wait, bombs really made you leave your home?" And they said, "Yeah." And then the boy from Congo said, "Me too." And I watched the boy's face from New York completely change. And he handed his stick that he would so, for a moment, really wanted to hang on to his weapon. He handed it to the animator, and he looked at her and he said, "I don't think I need this." And then they all went back to playing. And so it's those kinds of conversations. If we as the adults can create empathic spaces, that there's an inclusivity where conversations can be real, then there's a learning that happens that's much greater. And I know that young boy from New York is forever changed, and how he interfaces with people will be forever different. And so there's something about respecting these young ones, these youths that come from these countries, that they're not broken. There's not something wrong. They are, you know, that it's important to see that they're these whole human beings, and they have their stories to tell, but they'll tell them at their own pace and when they're ready. And that's one of the most empowering things I think we can do is create these spaces that are safe for the cultures to meet, for the different kids to come together. Because honestly, all the kids that I meet from all these different countries, they just want to play and learn, just like all the kids I know from here from America. It's kind of the same thing. They're really wanting the same respect and space to play and learn.
Thank you. So we have another question from a couple in Germany as well. And forgive me if I mispronounced the name, Leonie and Mozart. They'd like to know if the U.S. government supports newcomers when it comes to English classes, or is it the task of the newcomers to find and finance their own English language classes? Can you speak to that?
Sure, yeah. We have a program here. So we have an office called Office of Refugees. It's a federal office. So there's something called social services. And one of the social services is teaching English. So, and the funding coming through the federal government to the state. However, the funding is really is not enough to provide English for all the clients. So for example, from our 17 classes. If we want to really take just the funding or use just the funding, it will cover about only one class. So for that, what we try to do is we have partnerships with different communities here in the state. So for example, many local colleges, synagogues, temples, churches will give us a space. They want to really partner in teaching newcomers, their new neighbors. So they give us like the space, or the city, also the city, some cities. So what we will do also, we have teachers, and we have some paid teachers, and we have some volunteer teachers. So as sometimes I tell that even our paid teachers are 90% of their work is voluntary work. So we cannot do it without the community here in the state. And we cannot even teach English in this level without all the support that we have from the community. Again, there's the funding. The funding is very little, but what really makes make a difference is the community partnership. So for example, half of our staff is in teaching English is volunteer teachers. We do not pay for the space. With the textbooks, usually it's donated. The money is donated from people to their new neighbors. So I can say that it's a little bit from the government, but mostly it's from the communities. And then after a while, when the refugees are really getting their English, they have been here for 5-6 years, we see started themselves volunteering, teaching English, and also sometimes donating spaces for newcomers.
Okay, thank you. Another question that's directed to you, Ashraf, and it's from Kara Greenblatt. Given how white and homogeneous the society is in Vermont, do you see refugee kids experiencing much racial and ethnic discrimination? And if so, what have you found to be the best way to help them address it? And how does Crossroads and mentors in particular help kids with this?
So I'll start with the first part, and I'll leave the second part for Catherine, if that's okay. And so in our state, it's more like a rural state, but we have some kind of urban area called Burlington urban area. So it's really giving the number of the citizens here, and how are they welcoming really refugees to the cities in here. So one factor really is welcoming, because people want more diversity. We used to be the second whitest state. I think that we used to be the first one. Now we are the second, I think. And people need more diversity here. The second thing is also economic. So there's a need for population. We have a shrinking working population. So there's a need actually for a population and for economic reasons. So, and refugees really now, I think, the only growing working population in Vermont. So for me, racism is not a big issue in here in the school, but again, it's
we have, like, sometimes we have workshops for parents just to let them know about harassment, hazing, bullying, and so on. So just to understand what's happening in the schools, and what if they see something, they have to really discuss it with the teachers and so on. So far there are not a lot of racial incidents, but I think we cannot say it's zero. It's still happening. So it's still it's happening with really people. They do not use discrimination. They use other words, but it's at the end of the day, it's really meant in a way in another discrimination. So sometimes we see the opposite of racial discrimination, that we see some parents wants more diversity in the schools, and they try to register their kids in a school with higher diversity. But to be frank with you, we cannot say there's no discrimination. I'll be lying if I say that. We have some incidents that's there's some kind of discrimination against New American, but it's comparing to other states, I think the number is really low.
Yeah, I can definitely add to that, particularly since my work, doing the same work that I've done in the Oakland Bay area, living and working there, and in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and then moving up here. What I can say about Vermont is, what I've noticed is our biggest challenge in training our mentors is getting them past the idea that there's no racism here, because there is. I haven't yet, unfortunately, worked with a student of color that hasn't been called the N-word at some point, and that's kids from Iraq, kids from Congo. It's any of the kids that can be perceived as a person of color. And one of the ways we directly work with the students, and we've done this in our team programs, is just like SNCC in the civil rights era, we train the students to respond with nonviolence. We train them to respond with compassion and to maintain their own self-dignity and integrity, and then be able to then look at what needs to change within the system that they're in. Like Ashraf was mentioning, training the parents and the bullying and the harassment. We're working to shift what's happening in our school systems. And one of the things that's happening that's really amazing here, that I think is a microcosm of what I think is going to be happening all over America, is I was just beside myself applauding when I saw the incoming freshmen in our Burlington High School. The diversity was astounding. We're talking 62 languages other than English being spoken in this group of freshmen. And so that means that the teacher body and the administration is going to have to change. It's inevitable. Change is inevitable to be able to support this level of diversity that's an influx. And these aren't students that came over with families. These are students that were born here. And so they're having the beauty of both cultures, the culture that they're being raised in at home, of the family that immigrated here, and the culture of being here in America. So I think it's very powerful. And then training our mentors very specifically, again, like I mentioned before, about really understanding power and privilege so that they can support these students as they have to navigate these systems. I'm going to pause there because I'm seeing more questions come in. So I go back to you, Michael.
Yes. Thank you. And unfortunately, we're down to the past the hour actually. And so we don't have time for additional questions from Farah and actually Catherine, who presented quite a few questions. But I do appreciate everyone joining in and participating. Again, I'd like to thank you and Catherine and Ashraf for giving us your time and sharing with us your work. It really demonstrates what compassion is all about. And thanks participants for joining the call today. Our next webinar is next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, titled "The Struggle is the Name for Hope," a conversation with Renee Golden. And you can visit the charterforcompassion.org and click on the social justice page to register and find out more information about that webinar. And as always, the Charter for Compassion strives to shine a light on people and organizations whose work embodies compassion. To help us continue this effort, please confirm the charter if you have not. Join us, volunteer, donate your time or money. And again, thank you to our speakers and thank you to our participants.
Thank you so much, Michael.
All right.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the participants. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.